Hello and welcome to the i3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Julie Grahame. Eric Pickersgill has come from North Carolina to be with us tonight. Full disclosure, I am Eric's agent and it was our 10-year anniversary last week. Thank you. We're still speaking. Eric's work explores human behavior, memory, and the influence of technology through photography, video, installation, and conceptual art. Since his Removed series went viral, more of which you'll hear about shortly, he has been published in a gazillion magazines and newspapers worldwide, from Vogue and Vanity Fair to Wired and the Washington Post. His work's been used in books, placed in advertisements, and is even in the school curricula in Finland and Norway. Eric's been interviewed by the BBC and CNN, flown to Asia by the World Economic Forum, sent to Rio for a gigantic installation, and dispatched to Paris for a TEDx lecture. And his prints have been exhibited worldwide in both solo and group exhibitions. And now his first monograph is on the way from a very cool publisher named Snap Collective. To cap it all off, he holds his drink better than me, and hence I was hungover this morning and he was not. Warm welcome for Eric Pickersgill. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Julie, and for the past 10 years of your life. It's really been a blessing to work with you. We actually got to take a selfie yesterday in the same spot that we took our first photograph together 10 years ago, and it's been a wild and amazing ride that has brought me to you all here today at SVA. I want to thank Tom and Marco and Katrin Eisman, obviously, for getting this whole party started. It feels great to be back in an academic setting. I feel like I have really great fond memories of being in a graduate program, and you're going to hear a lot about that tonight, where a lot of the work that brought me here today started within my master's program at Chapel Hill. Tonight my goal is to speak to you a little bit more about my practice, how I got here, also to hopefully give some tips to you all who are studying and getting your master's in photography, to give you at least a few points that helped me get here today. I'm going to start all the way mostly back at the beginning. This is a young Eric Pickersgill. No, I don't have a twin. This was actually a photograph I found at my parents' house recently, where my mom had bought, the package deal and never clipped the photograph and found someone else to give one to. But that materiality and kind of the intention within a photograph is really at the core of my practice, and you'll see more about that as I move forward. I was raised in South Florida. My grandmother was an immigrant from Havana. She came to the United States when she was 12. And a big juncture in my life will happen when I was 12 as well, where I kind of realized that where I was living is very different than where I grew up. That's me right here in front of some sort of Super Bowl cake. My mom's birthday is always near the Super Bowl, and I grew up in the era of Don Shula and Dan Marino, for any of you longtime NFL fans, so a lot of screaming at the TV was what I was raised around. Pretty idyllic childhood up until I was 5, and then Hurricane Andrew struck South Florida, the town of Homestead that I was growing up in, which was really the hurricane people talked about before Hurricane Katrina. This was what was left over of my grandparents' avocado farm and the house that they were living in. There was like over 120 mile an hour winds, and the avocado trees essentially became projectiles and just ripped their house up. I grew up just a few miles from here. Our house looked similar, and rather than boarding up, because my parents grew up in South Florida, they spent the night having a hurricane party, and then by the end of it, we were 11 people and 2 dogs in a walk-in closet. So I almost became a meteorologist. That was the first job I wanted to be as a kid. I was very interested in science and maybe coping with this trauma from the storm. And this is the RV that we lived in for almost a year as our whole town was rebuilt. Our school, Avocado Elementary, is a real name of a school. But that school had to be rebuilt, and this is where we lived. I think that this experience brought our family really close together. My parents had the option to send us off to Indianapolis to live with relatives, and instead chose to keep us there as we all rebuilt together. And that sense of like family and closeness is also a really big part of my practice and who I am as a person. This is my grandmother teaching me how to drive a tractor. We replanted the grove, and it became an avocado farm, and then it became a citrus farm is what they replanted. And so my grandmother was really big about teaching. She was also a teacher herself, and so that fed into my pathway in education as well. So fast forward to age 12, it's the same time that my grandmother had moved from Havana to, actually to New York is where she came first. My family decided to relocate from South Florida to Charlotte, North Carolina, which was a very different culturally than where I was growing up. My neighbors were Cuban, Peruvian, I'm quarter Cuban, and then all of a sudden I was in this like white suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have this distinct memory of meeting a group of kids who were essentially making jokes about the men who were speaking Spanish who were building the houses in their neighborhoods. And they thought that like making fun of them was something that I would also be interested in. And that was the first kind of experience of racism in a way that I hadn't seen before. And that stuck with me all the way through my adulthood and kind of shaped the way that I see the world that was happening. Fast forward a little bit more into high school. I was lucky enough to get placed into a photography class. I didn't ask to be into photo class, but one of my student advisors put me into photo. And so I fell in love with it immediately. So any of you who have ever worked in a darkroom, you remember that first time you saw a silver print emerge underneath a safe light. I mean, it's a magical experience. I get the chills just thinking about it now because physics doesn't really explain it, or chemistry doesn't fully explain it in the way that it just feels like magic, especially seeing it at a young age. I was really into BMX. I liked jumping off things and taking risks, and so naturally BMX was a subject of mine very quickly. I was really trying to emulate the photographs that I was looking at in BMX magazines and just trying to create that sense of a moment, like the photograph was operating as a document. After a while, my teacher was like, okay, bikes are cool, but what about the people riding the bikes? And so I've got pushed into thinking about more of the stories and what was happening outside of the skate park. So this was a portrait of my friend Ryan, who had flipped over the handlebars and his teeth went through his upper lip. Yeah, it was a rough one for him. And then, of course, kind of mixed in with my BMX days, I was really interested in hardcore and punk music. I loved photographing, so bands were like, hey, do you want to come shoot the show? And then luckily my dad taught me how to back up a trailer, so then before I knew it, I was being invited to go on to tour so I could help people get the trucks and vans into the venues we were at. I putzed around with photography for several years. I graduated high school. I still didn't really see photography as a career at that point. I didn't have any role models who were actually making money in photography. So for me, it was really about the social piece of having a camera around my neck and presenting myself as a photographer. That was like an easy way to display like who I was or why I was in a situation. And as an anxious teenager, it was nice to kind of have that visible marker of who I was or what my purpose was. When I was about 2 years after high school, both of my grandparents had strokes a year apart from each other. And that sent me to live into Central Florida. I was the only person in the family that could kind of drop everything and help take care of them. And while I was down there, I had a couple friends who decided they were going to move to Chicago. And I had a friend of mine, specifically Chris, who said, you should come check out Columbia College someday. And he sent me this link to an open house. And I sent it to my mom that night, and I was like, maybe in a year or two when things settle down, I get back from Florida and everybody's kind of back to normal, I could explore this program. And since this is getting recorded, I give a direct shout out and appreciation to my mom for doing what she did, because this changed my life. But the next morning I woke up and my mom had booked me a flight to go to Chicago and go see that open house at Columbia. So fast forward a few months later, and there I was. I moved up to Chicago with 6 friends from high school, and we got a hold of this warehouse space on the east side of town. The west side of town. The east side of town is Lake Michigan, if you've ever been to Chicago. And so we had the bottom floor of this building, and my dad sent me up with a circular saw and corded drill, and we built 7 bedrooms, kind of cubicles, no ceilings, so all the music, this actually is a stack of cabinets. My roommates were musicians, so we didn't sleep very much, but we had ramps in there, we had a stage for bands to come and play, kept our rent really cheap. It was a lot of fun. It was kind of like a punk rock fraternity. I built a darkroom off the kitchen, so instead of having to spend late nights at the darkroom at school, I could produce my prints right there in-house. I quickly fell in love with large format photography. I loved the idea of having this big clunky camera. I was studying under photographers who had kind of a long history of street photography, like Paul D'Amato, Dawood Bey, Terry Evans. A lot of people who studied underneath Winogrand, just a really rich culture of photographers in Chicago. And so I started going out onto the streets of photography, and this joke used to land a little better when I was younger and a little thinner, but rather than looking like this walking through the streets of Chicago, this was me. as an undergraduate. And this is a portrait by photographer Kayla Story. She did a whole series on how you feel mentally when you're thinking about being at Disney. So I set out on the street trying to make portraits of people, and this was one of the first times I actually found someone who was really just kind of being like, why are you here? And I've got this giant camera on my shoulder and a big messenger bag full of negative holders. And this was a guy named Eddie. And after talking about the camera for a few minutes, we started talking about our lives, and I was telling my story of why I was living in Chicago, and he told me about his story about how he had been shot in a young age and never could walk without a cane since he was like 13. But I also was thinking really about color, and I really loved how his shirt and his pants really matched this background. Even the kind of goldish tone of the Altima in the background just all blended into this piece, and it felt sculptural in a way. And so I was really, really interested in color, but also got really excited by having this connection with someone that I otherwise wouldn't have met if it weren't for photography. One day while I was out shooting, I found this still life, and the top book on this stack of books, the title's called A Conscious Person's Guide to Relationships. And that kept coming back to me over and over again about how can I use photography to meet people in my neighborhood, but also get beyond just having that interaction with them on the street. This went on for a few weeks, and I feel like this is a theme in my work where I get to a certain point where I want to just push it further, or I either lose interest or I just feel like there's something more that I can be getting out of a situation. And one day I was photographing my neighbor BT, and this was probably second or third time I'd made his portrait. And going back to the Super Bowl theme, I think this was Super Bowl Sunday. And after making the portrait, he invited me to come over and watch the game with him and his family. And I said, of course, let's do this. And he said, all right, well, and he gave me the address. And it was a couple blocks over, and I came over later in the day. And I show up at this house, and I see that there's these boards in the window. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. And I went in, and he explained to me, he said that his family members lived throughout the neighborhood, but also him and his friends were living for free in these foreclosed homes. So this is 2008, right after the housing market crash. And so there's all these boarded up brownstones all across Chicago. And when they're not creating occupancy for these houses, people are coming in and looting the copper pipes, or kids are coming in. An example of this house, they jumped through the ceiling and just kind of wrecked these spaces. And the banks who reclaim these properties kind of came up with these kind of back-ended deals of offering people a place to live so that the houses were kind of protected. It was this kind of hidden story happening during the housing market crash. And again, thinking about color, this photograph really stood out to me where the red is coming into that background, and warm versus cool, it creates space, it separates, it draws the eye in. And I really thought that there was this like loaded story within this also beautiful image. I was also paying attention to the traces that were left behind from the families who were in these homes. So this was a space where I imagine there's like a bunk bed, and maybe a brother and a sister share this room, and they're drawing on these walls and putting stickers, and then all of a sudden they're being ripped out of their home and telling them they have to leave because of financial situations. It's okay. So I started to get to meet more of the people that lived in the houses. They were also kind of working on the spaces too, so they would get a little bit of extra cash if they were fixing up or cleaning the properties. This work ended up becoming mostly my thesis of undergrad, and I spent probably almost 9 months in and out of photographing these families and these portraits, and then also still creating the still lifes of what was left in the homes. When I got towards the end of undergrad, I was caught with that same kind of panic that I think a lot of people have is, what do I do? What's going to happen after school? I didn't have people calling me up to be a photojournalist, or, oh, your art practice is going to explode now and you can just pay your bills that way. So I was really scared about that. And at the same time, I also found out a program called Teach for America. If you've ever heard of Teach for America, it's a national organization that places people who are not planning on going into education and sets them up with learning how to teach and committing to 2 years of teaching in a low-performing or low-income school. And as soon as I heard about that mission, I was like, yes, this is something I really want to do. So I left Chicago. I got accepted to Teach for America. and they sent me down to Mississippi. I was actually placed at Clarksdale Elementary School, which is actually the school that Morgan Freeman went to. And then just like a town over is where B.B. King is from. So this like really deep, rich history, but also extreme poverty down there. I still tried to photograph while I was there, but also jumping in this teaching program, there's really not much time to do that. So I made a few portraits like on the bus ride. We had about an hour ride into our training school at sunrise each morning. This is me and with one of my students that summer, David. He loved using my camera, so I'd bring it in. I was actually teaching science, and I would still try to find ways to incorporate photography and use that to connect with the kids. And then this was my classroom in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we had oftentimes like over the population that we were supposed to have per classroom, and you just had to do with what you could to, with what you had, I guess. That time I also met my wife, who got accepted to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she was really pushing me of like, hey, I know we've been teaching for 2 years, you're really passionate about that, but also you're an artist, you're a photographer, you know, where are you going to kind of find a way to blend those two things? And I wasn't sure, other than the fact that she was going to go to Chapel Hill, and I was like, let me see if I can do that too. So I applied to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Master's of Fine Arts program, which is an interdisciplinary program. So I wasn't just working strictly with photographers, but I was also working with painters, sculptors, performance artists. And this work actually was one of the first bodies of work that I did while I was there, which was to go drive back to Charlotte like 2.5 hours every weekend, and I was going to photograph, or I did photograph, my students, but also place them or have them point out something that was connected to them, or it was at least related to something they were aspiring for in their future. Then I paired up those portraits and their aspirations with their reality and kind of the disparity between their resources and those of their neighbors. So as you know, most public schools are bound by zip code. So you can live on one side of the street and go to the high-performing Myers Park High School on the right, or you could be placed at Garinger High School, where I was teaching at. One activity I had for my students when I first started teaching was I would pull up on the screen and I would pull up Google Images, and I would type in Myers Park High School, and the page would be filled with kids who got academic scholarships and tennis championships and baseball scholarships. And then when you go to Google Image and type in Garinger High School, it was just pages of police cars. Oh. And I was like, this is the way that the community is perceiving you. And are you going to allow that to identify who you are, or are we going to work together as a class and show that you are important and you are not what this search engine is actually depicting of you? And I use it as a tool, and I felt like it was helpful for kids to see that that was the perception of them, that didn't have to be who they were. So I showed that work and kind of got ripped to shreds. I think that the meaning was important of that work, but what stood out to me was the fact that in this interdisciplinary program, I had all of these artists kind of coming at me and saying, you're taking photography and you're using it as just this one-to-one relationship of here's what something looks like and here's what you should take from that. Whereas there's a lot more that you could do within the medium to unpack it, to push back on the history of photography or the way that it's used now, and subvert the meaning within an image. And it doesn't just have to be this one-to-one document of a photograph. And that really set me off on a whole different trajectory in making work. So I started doing these self-portraits and placing text directly over them. I was thinking about how each photograph, whether consciously or subconsciously, we inject meaning into it, and we want it to have this purpose all through the way that we're composing a picture. And so this was a way of subverting that. So if you look closely here, like this tape measure, I was thinking about like the historic lineup photographs. If you look closely, it says that like I'm 48 inches tall. So I've manipulated this like minor part of the picture that shows that the frame is actually misleading. While I was working on this body of work, my Nana, Miriam, who was teaching me how to drive the tractor, she passed away quite quickly. She had a brain aneurysm. And it kind of turned our family upside down. She was kind of this like matriarch for all of us. And so I was driving back and forth from North Carolina, or from Chapel Hill to Charlotte, where my parents were and where my grandparents were, and helping move my grandfather into my parents' house. And while I was going through all of their things, I would spend a lot of time with my grandfather. Would come and cut his hair, and this was a portrait I made after one of his haircuts. But I stumbled upon his 8mm motion picture films, and I was watching them with him and trying to kind of decode them. So my grandfather had that stroke, his memory was lapsing, and I had these little vessels that held all of this memory and all of this past that he had, and the medium itself was failing because the notes were so cryptic that he would include in these, and then his memory is already gone. And a lot of these were filmed before my mom was even born, so we had no way to like actually decode these failing images. So I came up with these still lifes where I would actually take some of my grandfather's clothes and I'd stretch them over a piece of cardboard, and I cut a hole on one side and actually projected a light through the actual canister so you could see those layers of each section of film. I thought they were these beautiful pieces. I also have video where I would record my grandfather struggling to explain what he was seeing, and you could kind of see in his eyes that he wanted to desperately hold on to this past, but his brain and the medium would fail him. There was also these beautiful moments of artifacts and also performance within photography that are still happening today. So you have these like selfies that they were making on the beach in Aruba in 1960. Kind of photographing the photographer still happens today. Mm-hmm. I was also in this period mentally where my wife and we had just gotten engaged, and this is actually a photograph from our save the date or engagement shoot. And I was thinking a lot about the performance within the photograph and thinking about the gestures that are expected in pictures. And so I started this series where I would break the expectation of the photograph in a candid moment. This was at my bachelor party cruise. The Norwegian cruise line photographer made me retake this picture. And I went to the sales desk where they have them all displayed. You know, they don't edit it, so they're just all out on the wall. So they were like, "Are you sure this is the one you want to buy?" I was like, yes, this is the one that I need. So that summer, I had incredible input. So I actually spent most of the studio visits, I would take a portrait of the people that would come and visit me at my studio. And I bring this up right now just as like a pointed message to those of you who are studying right now that the value you have of the people around you is just tremendous. It is like huge volume of input and diverse ideas, and life's never going to be as focused as it was while you're at grad school to be able to just be working on your work. If I could go back to grad school now, I swear to you I would. I really would. The other thing I did while I was in grad school that first summer that I was lucky to do was I was accepted to 2 different artist residencies that summer. One was in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and then the other one was in upstate New York in Troy. And I promise I'm going to land this plane. We're getting into the removed work right now. It's coming. So while I was in New York, I was at this residency. It's this beautiful old church, and from the outside it's gorgeous. There's this stained glass, and there was 3 or 4 other artists working. It rained the entire time I was there. I had been married for like 3 weeks at this point. I built an even darker cave that I could go into to make the work that I was working, which was a terrible decision. I was essentially making these enlargements of photographs on a digital screen, but making silver prints out of them. The work was awful. And I'm just showing you that because this work got me in such a dark, like, sad place that allowed me to actually be open to the idea that led me to removed. So one morning of the residency, I left the space and I went to a coffee shop in town. And I don't journal a lot, but it just happens that this moment I wrote this journal, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in summary, on August 8th of 2014, I was sitting at this cafe, and this mom and dad and their 2 daughters came in and sat at the booth next to me. And it was during golden hour, and so you know photographers, you are like kind of had that heightened sense when that light is warm and it's glowing and it's at a steep angle and everything looks like a film. And they're sitting at this booth next to me, and it was the first moment where I realized, what are we doing on our phones? And so the mom the dad and the 2 daughters were all on their phones, and the mom was just staring out the window, and it just became this like cinematic scene. And I just was journaling like, do I do this? Is this going to be like a problem? And it made me wake up. It was like a moment of realization. And I was like, you know what? When I get home from this residency, like my wife and I are not going to go back into those old habits. We're not going to go right onto our phones. Like, we have so much precious time together and it's limited. She's studying medicine. I'm working on this grad program. Like, we've got to focus up here. And sure enough, when we got home, I would say 2 weeks later, it just went back to normal. And so one night, my wife and I were laying back to back in bed, and we're both on our phones, and I started to drift off to sleep, and all of a sudden I heard my phone slap against the hardwood floor in our house, and it woke me up, and I looked over, and my hand was still resting as if my phone was there. And my wife's back to back with me. The glow, like blue light of her phone is still casting across our dark room. And I just immediately was like, this is a photograph. This of an empty-handed gesture. It's a simple idea. I would shoot it from the ceiling fan's perspective down on us, and I just have to see what that photograph looks like. And so I made it. And it was as simple as that. And little did I know this photograph was going to change the whole trajectory of my life. But just that one photograph, and I did a little bit of experimentation around this time of making it. I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to be editing the phones out, or if if I was good enough at Photoshop, which I'm not. And I was also like, what would it actually mean if the gesture was a performance? And I was breaking that expectation that what you're seeing is not reality. It's black and white. You have to suspend judgment of whether or not this is a real thing, and it becomes art in that sense. It's something that's constructed and has meaning injected into it. And so I like when people see these photographs, they have to approach that idea, or even just question whether or not it was photoshopped. I think is just an act of art in itself, that people have to question what they're looking at. So that whole summer I set out to photograph. It started with a lot of families and friends. So like, that's my sister on the left. This was at Labor Day. She had a barbecue at her house, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna come over. I want you guys to just do what you're normally gonna do, and I'm gonna take some pictures. And then they assembled themselves like this in the garage, having a cigarette. All the kids and everybody's out back. And so then I came up and explained to them. I said, actually, I'm gonna take your phones away now and have you look into your empty hands. There's always this kind of aha moment when I make these photographs with someone and then we talk about it afterwards. And because I'm using the large format view camera, it's kind of a slow process. It's not a quick snapshot. I've got to focus, refocus. I really ask them to, go write an email or text message or just scroll Instagram, really get into that expression and that posture that you are in, and not try to be as posed so that it reads a little bit more realistic. So after doing families and friends for a while, I kind of went back to my old ways of Chicago and going out on the street and finding people and using this project as a way to create relationships with other people and kind of expand the demographics and the locations of the series. This is Jimmy and Michelle. This was taken in Burlington, North Carolina. And I actually photographed their wedding, and I met them from a previous series I'd done where I'd put an ad on Craigslist, and I said, absolutely free professional photography. And they had replied, and they needed engagement shots. So I went and did that for them. And then a couple weeks later, they said, hey, can we hire you to do our wedding? And I was like, sure. And I had in my head that I was going to make a remove photograph at the wedding. And throughout the day of this beautiful wedding, nobody was really on their phones. They were like very connected with one another. And also there was a couple moments, but I was like, I'm not going to interrupt their ceremony or their after party to stage this photograph. And I remember getting in my car and I pulled around the corner and I was like bummed out. I was like, man, like everything was there for a picture to be made and it just didn't happen today. And as I circled around the block to head towards the highway, I look over and Jimmy and Michelle were sitting on the hood of their Miata. And I was like, all right, we're here. So I turned around and came back in the parking lot and made the photograph with them. So I had my first solo show as my thesis exhibition at Chapel Hill. And it went great. It felt good. It was well attended. I got a lot of great feedback on it. And then I kind of got hit with that existential crisis again of what am I going to do next? And grad school's ending. I was lucky enough I got a job hired pretty much right away as the director of community engagement at the Light Factory, which is a nonprofit photography and education center in Charlotte. And about I don't know, 2 or 3 months into that job, a friend of mine who I met at Chapel Hill got a job here in New York at Business Insider. And he called me up one day and he said, hey man, I was hanging out with my producer. We were playing soccer at our pickup league and we were complaining about everybody on their phones and not paying attention to the games. Like, can we do a write-up of your series? And I was like, hell yeah, we can, let's do that. So he published it on October 7th, this interview piece, and I think it was a Thursday, and by Sunday I was live on the BBC, CNN was calling, I was getting literally hundreds of emails an hour. It was extreme and overwhelming and exciting. But out of all of my photographic education, the one thing that I really didn't learn or wasn't taught was licensing or copyright or how to protect your work or what to do in this specific situation. And I was like just completely thrown upside down. So I was like, I guess I should be making pictures. So I'm like, should have been answering emails, and I was staging self-portraits of me looking stressed out. But going back to the artist residencies, but also I did Review Santa Fe in 2015, and so I kind of had all these other pieces where I was connected within the art world with several different people. And so when this moment hit, I just started calling on everyone I knew, and I was like, somebody has to know how to navigate this situation. And also, if I'm ever maybe going to get a gallery, like this seems like the moment. I need to really strategize on this moment and capitalize on it. And so after several phone calls through Mary Engel and Denise Bethel, I got in touch with Julie. And Julie and I had about a 30-minute conversation, and I was like, things are pretty crazy. And she's like, it's not that bad. She was like, you got this, you'll be okay. And so I think I survived another like 24 hours, and I was essentially just giving the work away for free. And I called her back and I said, will you just sign in and look at it? Like, will you just look at my inbox right now, please? And so she said, fine, and she logged in, and I think an hour later, she's like, okay, let's go. And so we drafted up some invoices, and she started doing some billing for me and teaching me how to reply to these emails and kind of handling the licensing. And it changed the whole kind of trajectory of it, because now we weren't losing the value in the work. Because if you just hand it out to free for everybody, then the publishing agents or the writers or the journalists who actually want to place the work, they're going to kind of move on because it's just been spread out too thin. So Julie really helped navigate that. Having something go viral is insane. And actually, I think the numbers back then were different than kind of what I experienced even this year. But at the time, it was a lot. And the work started to take kind of its own life. So people were drawing my pictures, adding lightsabers, or making their own photographs. And this is Julie and I 10 years ago. Where was this again? In Bedford, yeah. Quickly after, I got in touch with Rick Wester Fine Art, who's here in Chelsea on 26th. And he offered my first solo show, and he also brought the work down to Pulse Miami during Art Week down in Miami. It all just happened like immediately. It was just wild. Fortunately, I didn't have any kids at the time, and I was able to just kind of put everything on hold. I actually quit the job at the Light Factory, which I regretted because I really loved working there, but I just didn't have the capacity to keep up for that. TEDx Bend, which is a TEDx Bend in Oregon, really established TEDx location, offered me a spot to come out, and so had to work on that. And with TEDx, you don't just like jump in and do a talk. It's weeks and weeks and weeks of strategizing. Every single word, every punctuated moment is choreographed. So it took a lot of work to deliver this talk. And during the talk, I made a photograph of the audience. So there were over 1,400 people there, all doing the remove posture. And I love this guy who decided to be a big character. There's always one. And then later in the year, I was invited to go out to Paris to do a TEDx at the Panthéon Sorbonne. So in 2016, besides my career kind of launching, there was also a lot of things going on politically. If you remember what elections were happening in the year of 2016. And at the same time, in a parallel world, the internet was a crazy place, and in a way that I was starting to get nervous about. I saw a post for a concert that was going to be taking place at the Rose's Discount Store in Morganton, North Carolina, which is about an hour from where I live. And according to this Facebook post, 2,200 people attended this event. So I went to this event and I wanted to see if it was going to be real or not, or if anyone would actually show up. And sure enough, dozens of people did. So much so, and there was so many phone calls to the store that the management had to put a note on the door that says the advertisement on Facebook about a Limp Bizkit concert is fake. There is no concert management. And this seemed like a one-off kind of silly thing that was happening, and I didn't really realize how much of a bigger picture this was until I started to see that there were several other ones starting to take place. So there was these kind of copycat events happening, and some of them were quite clever. Nickelback Live at the Dollar Tree. This one was less attended, although some people did show up. Security had it really under control. So. These people happened to be broken down on it. I don't think they were Nickelback fans, but. So I spent that summer. I think I went to. It was probably like 12 to 15 concerts everywhere from Chicago to Drake at the Hooters in Atlanta. That was fun, convincing my wife that I was going to go do that. Oh, that was Mudvayne at the family video. This one was on my birthday. I literally drove out to rural South Carolina at 2:30 in the morning to photograph an empty video store. This was in Tennessee. But I would show up, and you start to talk to people, and I was wondering. I was like, "Are you the person that made this?" Like, who, And people would usually deny it. But I just never really knew. And then I was actually at another one in Tennessee. This one was wild, 10,000 people. It turned out that the Taco Fest was actually created by this guy, Carter. And he was blown away that he had made this thing online, and then it had all of this traction. But he didn't really want to be the face of it. I mean, because it's like illegal, but not illegal, but it could be risky, So I started messaging the people who had created the events and started to get people to actually sit for portraits for me. And so I did these series of trolls interviews in my studio. And I would ask them questions, and I recorded audio of our conversation about like their motivation for why they made the Facebook event and what they were thinking about whether or not, if they felt bad about people being deceived. And so I was trying to place in this context, and actually it was kind of wild. I think it was 2 weeks or a week before the presidential election in 2016. A contact I had through a radio show on the BBC, through a previous interview about Removed, invited me on the show to talk about No Show, and they actually introduced the segment by playing Limp Bizkit live on the BBC, which I was like, that's probably never happened, which was pretty wild to me. But they were asking me, they were like, what is the sense in the States about having this disinformation? Because this is before people were saying fake news. They're like, what's being done about this misinformation? How are voters talking about it or worried about it? And I was like, I don't think they are. Like, people are seeing what they're seeing through their feeds. It's presented in the exact same shell that the news is, and so they're just taking it at face value and moving on with their day. And this is during the time when like Pizzagate was happening, and there's all these different kind of controversies happening online about things that were obviously not real, but it was actually swaying people's perception of reality. So this is a 2-minute long exposure of Hillary Clinton's concession speech. I put this work together in kind of a multifaceted exhibition. So this was in Marignac, France, during the Marignac Photography Festival. And each chair had audio where it was actually playing the answers to the questions of those interviews, but mumbled over each other. So it was this really like gritty sound out of an old CPU tower. And so it sounded crunchy and digitized. And it kind of brought you into this headspace of what was happening online at the time. After I finished that work, I got an invitation to go to India, and this was when I started to realize that Removed needed to continue on. There were people who were saying, that's great that you have this kind of southern presentation of your Removed series, but this is global, and it should be shown globally. So there was a kind of a private funder who invited me to bring Removed to India, and he hired a film crew, and we traveled kind of across the whole perimeter of India for about a month. this photograph like blew my mind. So there was this beautiful bridge in Rishikesh, and we were off at a cafe on one side, and he literally stopped dead center of the bridge and was taking a selfie on his horseback. And we were running over to him, and I was like, can I do this thing? And he was like, of course. And so we reassembled this photograph, but with an empty hand. It's on the beach of Mumbai. These like older siblings sucked into their phones, but the younger siblings are still having kind of a normal childhood. It was really hard to get the kids to not look at me. That was like the toughest part. Shortly after that, later in 2018, the World Economic Forum asked me to travel across Southeast Asia, so I was invited to go to Hanoi, Vietnam. I went to Singapore, Indonesia, Jakarta. And then they kind of put up this pop-up exhibition. So all of these world leaders across the Southeast nations came to this summit, presidents, prime ministers, to all talk about the digital revolution. And this was the centerpiece of the programming, was to talk about how are we going to remain human in an accelerated technical time. And I decided to wear a suit, which was a bad choice. I think I should have just shown up in normal clothes and looked like an artist, but that's okay. I thought everybody else was going to be in a suit, which they were. During that time, I also started my family, and this is a big part of my life now. So my oldest, Corbin here, who's going to be 9 this December. Tessa is going to be 6 in March, and Mr. Sam is going to be 4 in January. And so my artistic practice has been a little bit on hiatus over the past few years. I don't know if you guys are around, but there was a pandemic. So I tried to make photographs throughout that time. And really, just until this past year, somehow Julie and I have stayed busy enough that Julie still talks to me. But just this past year, it was completely random, but on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I think it was March this year, him and his guests just brought up the series conversationally. There was no placement or ask of that. It was just on their mind about how often we were on our phones. And so that propelled the series into a whole new life this year. I've seen more viral numbers this year than I had over the past 10. And I think also in a mental space, I think we're all starting to realize like the actual outcomes of this are not good. We also have scientific data now that shows what's happening. Jonathan Haidt wrote this book called Anxious Generation that really got traction over the last year, that really takes a scientific approach to what's happening to kids growing up in a digital age and how screen time is actually having causation with like the mental health crisis that we're seeing. So that's been really interesting to see that the work is still relevant and it's still moving forward. The Rio Innovation Week was just this past summer, so their curator reached out to me, and over a very short period of time, we put together this huge installation as part of their festival. And it was, to date, the biggest display of this work. I think it was over 40 photographs, and it was on this kind of vellum material, and it was backlit. And what I loved about it was that there's these 200,000 people coming into this technology conference all day, and on their way out, it was much more luminous, and people would kind of stop and have conversations and decompress from this like really busy day of learning about technology and to reflect on where they want to move forward with it. And then I also made more remove photographs while I was in Rio. And you can't see it because I've tried to repair them a little bit, but this was my first time traveling with large format film, and I had TSA open up my bag of exposed film flying out of Houston. I was going through security, and I asked for a hand check, so usually they'll swab the box for you and check it that way, because if you put it through the scanners multiple times, it causes fogging, or if you open it, obviously it can ruin the film. And I remember looking over as I went through the scanner, and man was over at the far table, and I see the black bag, and it's a shiny, glossy black bag, and I yell, "Don't open that!" And he looks back at me, and he looks like Jason Momoa. He was huge. And he was like, "Don't open what?" I was like, "Oh, I just yelled at a TSA agent. I'm not going to go home today." I changed my attitude immediately, and I just was like, just pack it up, I'm sorry. And we just moved on from our day. I had no recourse. I don't see how arguing with him was going to change anything. But yeah, out of 10 years of traveling with film, that was the first time I had a box opened. Most of it was repairable. Bringing the family back into it. So this is my son at Lake Almond, which is where we spend most of our summers. And I'd seen a boy literally looking at his phone going across the lake days prior on a paddleboard, and so we recreated that. So the series has had this kind of whole life and this arc of popularity and then kind of simmering for a while, and now it's back into people's consciousness. And it was during this time that a publisher called Snap Collective really excitedly and aggressively approached me about publishing this book. Books are difficult to do. I know that there's a talk, was it this past year, talking about self-publishing and the notion maybe that there's not money in it. And this format just completely made sense to me because I wasn't interested in trying to crowdfund 40 grand and then send it to a publisher to put a book together. This format really relies on pre-orders and having kind of a group of people already interested in waiting for a book. And I've kept up a mailing list since I was in grad school, and I encourage all of you to set that up, to have the support of people who, whether it's family or friends, but also beyond that, there's just people who are going to be interested in supporting you. And so when I reached out to them and said that I was doing this book project, even with these just being mock-ups and the book not being a physical object yet, people were very excited to support that, and we had a very successful launching campaign to make this book come to reality. And the founder of that publisher is actually in this room right now, and she's giving me that eye because I need to finalize my design, which I'm going to do tonight. We're right at it. I've been working with their incredible team of designers, and we're right at our final iteration right now. And so the book is going to ship out by the end of this year. And then also right now what I'm working to do is actually to take a step further with Removed, and I'm really interested in doing more of these large format collective groups of images. So I'm thinking about, imagine a concert where Benson Boone is on stage and there's 40,000 people, and we have this activation during the performance where we pose for this Removed photograph, and then afterwards, hopefully these people would put their phones away and actually enjoy the show. So that's where I'm pushing the work forward. I don't get to spend a lot of time in public as a dad with 3 kids. I'm at home a lot and speaking to children often. It's been an amazing few days being back in New York, which I haven't been able to do in a long time. But last night on my way home, I was standing at the platform and I was just seeing how absolutely every single person was on their phone. And the idea of just intentionally keeping mine in my pocket felt radical, and that is frightening to me. I'm not here to shame people, but I am just worried. And I think the divisiveness and the polarization that we're seeing is highly profitable. And so there's really not many people that are going to try to stop this from happening. And it's going to keep being designed to be more and more addictive. Phones are great, technology is helpful, but we've got to find some middle ground. And I'm openly saying that more. I think I used to be a little bit more quiet about that and just let the work do what it does, but I really, as a dad of 3 now, I'm genuinely concerned about the trajectory of humanity, and I think this is maybe one step of helping reclaim that. And after all of that, thank you all so much. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation. It was so amazing to learn about your work and sort of that kind of really resonating about kind of phone usage. And my question is sort of a follow-up. So when you make a photograph of someone and they're on their, then you remove their phone, is there sort of a conversation afterwards? Do people have this aha moment, maybe I am on my phone? Do people go right back onto their phones? And I know each case is probably unique, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of people really kind of think about that after being photographed by you.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is varying, like you said in your question. I think, I can think anecdotally, a lot of people in that moment are like, wow, I haven't thought about this in that way. And I think what excites me about that really, and what helps me or made me originally excited about the idea was the staging of this photograph gives people a sliver of that feeling that I had in that cafe that morning when I finally realized, like, wait a second, this is something that's kind of taking over and I don't feel like I have much control over it. But it gives you that moment of awakening of thinking about it more. And then I think a lot of people just get right back onto their phone. I mean, I personally struggle with my phone. I'm a compulsive person. And I think that, like, I'm just as, susceptible to getting on my phone too much, and I'm like trying to balance that just like everybody else. So yeah, it's just a varied response. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next.
Hi, very interesting whole topic.
Thank you.
I thought I was the only person that noticed similar, because I've even seen police officers driving while texting. So it is a very, very scary thing to witness. Do you primarily shoot with a large format, one, because you love it, or two, because now that everyone has a camera in their pocket, you go to a concert, everyone's on their phone, just like you said, does that differentiate your work from everyone else's, since everyone probably feels, why do I need a photographer for this? Because I could just, snap it on my phone. Like, how does your use of a large format differentiate you from,
Yeah. The large format camera, I mean, first and foremost, approaching a stranger with that camera, like, people immediately are interested in what you're doing, because most people have just never seen, I think majority of the photographs I showed here of my camera was like my old studio style monorail camera, which is like metal. And now I use this one that's kind of sleek and it's wood and brass. It's a really sexy object. So in that capacity, it just kind of helps break the ice and get people into the mode of even just having a conversation. I mean, I think that there is some subversion there of, like, I'm photographing, something new and contemporary with this older technology. I think that plays into it a little bit, but it's not like the end all be all reason to do it in that format. I would say the aspect of kind of breaking the ice with people is a big part of it. And then also a large format negative for me, the quality of it, the texture of it, it's just a different image than I'm capable of shooting digitally. I know a lot of people actually shoot and kind of post-edit their digital photographs to have that texture of a film photograph, but it just doesn't feel the same. The grain isn't the same. And then I can also print quite large with these, so a lot of my exhibition prints are like 40 by 50 inches. My Canon 5D Mark III doesn't hold up that well to that size of a print, so it's kind of twofold in that way. You're welcome.
So you mentioned that you thought about doing Photoshop, or you mentioned Photoshop early on. Have you ever thought about revisiting that, like actually shooting now that, AI and technology is pretty easy to remove stuff, even if you're not a Photoshop wizard?
Yeah, I've actually ran a couple different scenarios. I was actually first trying to see if AI was sourcing my images, so I was trying to just write prompts that would produce a photograph similar to, like, the one of my wife and I in bed. And it did. I mean, the first time I asked for that style of a photograph in ChatGPT, the output was black and white, and I didn't even ask for that. So it was sourcing some of that, information. I've done some in Photoshop. It's the content aware and fill, and it still just was funky looking. So especially with the gestures where you can see, like, the creases of the palms or the really articulate of the hands. We know AI still is, like, a little funky with hands. It's like a quick mode with that. But I've tried it. It's just, this process just feels better. And I like being out in the world photographing with people. So that's just a selfish.
Oh, I didn't mean creating them with AI. I just meant, like, photographing people with their phones and then just removing the phones.
Yeah, I haven't fully tried that. I think too the idea of, it's almost like a gotcha kind of moment where you could, because there's a lot of projects out there where people have photographed people using phones. There's, around the time that my work went viral the first time, there was this guy who had this project called Surf Fake out of France, and he was, like, using the, like, blur tool and grabbing people's faces and stretching down the image onto their phones. People that he wasn't asking permission to photograph or have that engagement with, and that piece for me is important to, like, make sure that there's consent and we have that interaction. So I haven't tried that though, just as a topic, I haven't. Okay. Yeah.
Great presentation. I just had one question, and it was, you like quickly went over it, and it was the Craigslist ad. Why did you create it, and why was it free? And I think there's a story there.
Right on. Honestly, it was like I'm in grad school. I'm without ideas, and it just was a thought in my head. I was like, what could come from this, and who would actually reply to it? And yeah, it kind of led to these other things that were unexpected. But most of them, I mean, I photographed like there was this family that was having like a 30th birthday party, and I was just like in their living room, and they're like cutting a cake, and I was like, why am I here? And it was really weird. And then the other one was like an author who had self-published this like novel she had been working on her whole life, and she needed the portrait for the inner jacket of her book, and she used it for that, and just like couldn't afford a photographer, and that felt fulfilling also, to just like do something kind for someone. So. Yeah, it was just a social experiment, really. You're welcome.
And more? Yep. Come and
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte. I'm the founder of Snap Collective, and I'm so excited to have you here. And I wanted to point out one thing that I'm also excited about is maybe you want to speak about where we can see your work next.
Yeah.
Times Square. So do you want to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little plug for Snap Collective. We were accepted for this. Essentially, it was a call for submissions about interpretation of the theme "Look Up." And that can take various forms. And when we saw that call for work, it was obviously very relevant to my body of work and the timing of the book coming out. And so we've collaborated to put together this piece, and it's actually using AI, and it's subversive in that way that we're using AI to create this, it's almost like a mini commercial about the book, where there's a mother who's distracted by her phone, and her daughter's kind of nagging at her to get her attention. And then all of a sudden the removed book opens, and she's kind of snapped into this reality of where she's supposed to be, or should be. And then the book actually goes into this rocket ship, which symbolizes another book project that Snap Collective has worked on, where they've actually taken these like discs essentially that have coding information that gets shot off into space. So we have this like long-lasting record of what's happening here on Earth. And so a bunch of the original books from Snap Collective are actually in space now. And so in this image, the removed books being propelled into outer space. And so during the Macy's Day Parade in Times Square, there's going to be a monitor that's going to show this piece. Yeah, two monitors?
Yeah, 3 monitors.
Three
We just
monitors.
upgraded.
So this is news to me now, yeah.
So you should all come. It's going to be
yeah,
a party.
come to Times Square.
Having a Thanksgiving dinner on Times Square and
Yeah.
launching your book.
Yep.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Alan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my voice is a little tough. More of a kind of response than a question. It struck me as interesting when you were showing the internet pieces, the fake concerts.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, I thought that it was going to be something that you had made up all by yourself, and that the people that were sitting around on the chairs weren't real either. And somehow or other, that I don't know what to make of having that reaction to it, but for a while, I thought you were punking us all.
It felt that way when I was making it. I mean, it was like surreal. I was like, how is this happening? And it felt like there weren't that many people paying attention to it. It was, yeah.
Nice piece, though.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Hi. I'm old, so I certainly take your point about the phones. But I wonder if you've ever considered that for some people, as for me, who are non-photographers, having this easy camera has been fabulous. It's opened my eyes. I love taking pictures in this city, which just gives and gives and gives. Should I just get a camera?
That's a great question. That's up to you. Yeah. I take pictures with my phone too. When I get home, my kids are going to be like, what was it like on the train? Or, walking down Bedford Avenue and the light's great and I'm snapping a picture of my phone. I think it all depends on what you want to do with those photographs. If it's fulfilling in what you're doing right now, that's fantastic to me. I mean, that also signifies you as a photographer. It's not, I think that any format of being an image maker is a beautiful thing. And
Well, it's
Yeah.
also enormously enhanced my interest in photography.
That's fantastic.
That's
Yeah,
why I'm here tonight.
I'm glad that they brought you there.
There's
And
that.
yeah, and it really is worth reiterating that I don't think that our phones need to disappear, and I'm not asking for a world without them, but I do want some more regulation and some more consciousness about how we're using them and how they're being designed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, great project, always loved it. I wonder, first of all, how many individual photographs do you have in that series, and is there an end to it, or are you continuing? And does it make sense?
Yeah.
And does it work financially?
And does what?
Does it work financially for you?
Yeah, so I think there are about 160 that are registered with the U.S. Copyright Office that I consider the originals of through India and U.S. and Southeast Asia. The book has it's 192 pages, and I think that there's 170 images. It's pretty high up there. There's probably over 200 that I consider officially in the series. When I photograph each scene, I'm shooting anywhere between like 2 to 6 exposures per setting, depending on how confident I am on the composition, or if someone will allow me to reframe it, and then I can pick a different image. I'd say that the average is probably 2 exposures per image. So it's a pretty high hit rate that I'm aiming for. I still consider the series ongoing, and I don't know how I'll know if I'm going to stop doing it ever. And I don't know if that devalues the work or not, but my curiosity is still there, and I think that there's still like groups of people and different environments that I haven't photographed yet. So, I think I constantly have other projects going on, and I'm pretty restless in that way. I also own a printing company and a design studio, and I run that with my family as well. So there's just always constant creation happening, but I think Remove will keep going. And as long as we are able to keep licensing it, which doesn't seem to be ending. I mean, we got a request from Brazil this morning for like an educational textbook, and so that helps pay the bills, and I can afford more film and more processing. So as of now, it's still financially viable, absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for coming today. I was wondering, when looking at your photos, most of your subjects are adults or teenagers, but I don't see a lot of kids. Probably I missed those photos. But I was wondering, since like younger generations are the ones being mostly affected by this tendency of being on our phones, are you considering on making more photos? Is there a reason why you don't like include them in your photos? Just curious.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that might have just been more of my edit for this presentation. So in the book, and actually this was a beautiful part about the book was, and I don't know why this took me until now, but the book is actually divided up into 5 chapters. And those chapters are all organized by different relationship types. So it starts with the first chapter is just union. So it's all about relationships and couples, opening with the picture of my wife and I. And then it moves into the next chapter, which is, which one's next? Individual. So Solitude is the name of the second chapter. And that actually has by far the largest number of photographs in it in the whole series, because I've realized that our phones, despite it feeling like a highly connective device, it's actually causing us to spend a lot more time alone. And that tends to be the scenes that I'm encountering people on their phones. And then the second chapter is, I should have this rolling off the top of my head. The second chapter is tribe, so any type of relationship between like friends or the workplace, so how that's being altered. The fourth chapter is kin, which is more about the kids and parent relationships. And then the fifth final chapter is multitude, which is the larger groups and what it means collectively to be going through this experience. I do want to push back just a little bit on your question, because there's been a lot of conversation. It tends to go in the sense of like young people are most susceptible to this, and like they hear this tagline of like, what kind of childhood are these kids having? But when I look around, I'm really asking like, what kind of adulthood are we having? Because I think it's easy to say the next generation is susceptible to this. And I was born in 1986, so I had a childhood without it, but I had Facebook like senior year of high school. So I've kind of straddled that age group of development with and without it. I would argue, and I'm hoping that the younger kids are actually going to grow up and start to repel from this a little bit, because they're going to see how their parents are totally checking out. And when we look at like mental illness and like self-harm, it's happening to not kids, but actually older adults are having higher rates. So yeah, it's actually an everyone problem and not just a young kid problem. Not pushing back. I'm actually glad you said that so I could express that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. What's your thoughts on those goggles that are coming out? And like, how would you go about photographing that? Because that is truly creating a world that's not even looking at. It's immersing them almost completely.
Yeah.
So just, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the headsets are wild. I don't even know how I'm going to represent that because it's almost like, you know, all of a sudden we're just glassy-eyed, you know, and just transported. I've thought about that a lot because at some point the object is going to change. Yeah, I really don't know. I'm not sure. I think what will be lasting is that these photographs are going to represent this very specific moment where the world did shift digital, and that gesture will, and kind of really what I think it's going to encapsulate is the anxiety and these like boiling up of concern that's occurring during this moment while we shift into this new paradigm. But yeah, I'm not sure. So that could be a project for some of you working on your your master's here.
Hi, Eric. This is a little off the wall. What film do you shoot with, and what ASA?
So primarily I'm shooting with HP5 Ilford.
Okay.
It's a 400 speed,
Right.
and it's just kind of the most versatile that I've been able to find, and my local camera shop stocks it, and so I
Do
like
you
to support them.
process it, or do you ship it out?
I did for a long time. Now, I actually remember when I was working on Remove and my son was first born, my darkroom was in an attic space and I'd have to carry buckets. There was no plumbing up there, so I'd have to carry 5-gallon buckets of chemistry through his nursery, up the stairs. And my wife's a pediatrician and she's like, what is in that fixer though? And I was like, yeah, I need to probably sort this out. So I actually shipped here to New York now for my processing. So LTI Lightside does my black and white processing. And they didn't ask me to say this, but a plug to them. They always do great work. I really trust them a lot. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yep. I'm getting my steps in.
Hi. Coming back to your messages about new technologies and the fact that we are more and more addicted to telephone, as part of this generation that never knew the world without the telephone, do you think that the fact that we are coming back more and more coming back to film, photograph, and film video, do you think that that's related, or what's your opinion about it? Because I don't know if I'm a victim of that, but I also like to use more and more film, photograph, and rather than just use my phone.
Yeah, I mean, I see those trends modulating, but it does seem more and more often that people are saying that they're shifting towards film again. And like Kodak has just announced that they are coming back with their, I think it was their C41 film. Like, I don't remember exactly, but that was a big announcement recently. And I don't know if it's nostalgic or not. You know, I don't have the pulse on that kind of market, but I don't know, if you've ever shot film and you take an exposure and then you can't see it immediately, that like act of faith is pretty cool. You know, it's like you're just hoping you got it, and I don't know, maybe that's going back to the center of our brains that's enjoying the addictive nature of, right? You're like taking a chance in a slot machine every time you're going onto Instagram. So maybe it's tuning into that part of our brain that we're like somehow circling back to taking chances with taking pictures. But yeah, I mean, shooting film is just a beautiful thing to do, and it feels, I don't know, there's just something about it, like captures the soul almost of what you're doing, or you can, I don't know, having that like negative also. So I don't know if you saw the very early photographs I was showing of like Chicago. They're like super pixelated. Like I had to pull back off of Facebook because I had a hard drive crash and a laptop stolen in the same week when I lived in Chicago, and I lost all of the digital photographs that I had made from like 2000 and like from high school, essentially 2005 to like 2008, or that whole 3-year chapter where I was shooting every day is all gone. And that was a big lesson on like redundancy and backup. So if you all have a course on that, please push that heavily because that's a really important thing in your practice. But having a negative, like I can just go back down to my film box in the studio and do a rescan, and I'll always have that, and that's important to me too. So, yeah. You're welcome.
Hello, Cody Willits. You talked about having a compulsive phone addiction at times as well. I'm curious, have you ever had any techniques that you tried in your own home that helped you, like, I don't know, remove your phone from that time, like slots, or talk about, you know, maybe the barriers or ones that worked, if you had like locations or time-wise?
Yeah, thank you. And that's Cody, who's actually in this series, by the way. He's a longtime friend of mine. I don't know if you remember the portrait of the couple sitting in each other's laps. That's Cody back there from that photograph. Thank you for being here, Cody, and thank you for that question. I think for us, it's about time limits. So like dinner, absolutely, it's off the table. You know, I work from home, so that makes it really hard. My kids even will call me out on it. So the portrait of my wife and I in bed, we have a big print that just came back from like a 7-year exhibition cycle, and rather than leaving it in the crate, I hung it in our living room. And like my son will point up to it and be like, "Dad," you know, and I have to just kind of snap back out of it and just be present again. And I'm just as susceptible to it as everybody else. But having set times of the dinner table being a place where we're not going to do that, or even at restaurants leaving it in the car. I just camped out with our kids in the backyard on Saturday night, which was not the best thing to do the weekend before I had to fly here. But we spent the night out in the tent, and there was no devices, there was no electricity out there. We had a campfire, we cooked 2 meals in a row, just literally being in the woods in the backyard, and it was awesome, and it was liberating, and you stop twitching for your phone after a while. So it's about physical distance. So if you can put it in the other room or not sleep with it in the same room and use an alarm clock, that's huge. I mean, I've reclaimed a lot of sleep by just not bringing it in my room at night. So the charging basket's in the studio on the other side of the house, and that's where it's at for the night. And then we have an Alexa, which is what wakes us up. But yeah, we're still wired one way or the other, I guess.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. I'm one of the students in the Masters of Digital Photo program. So like everything that you've had to say is just very relevant and interesting. But I was curious about, one, you mentioned a mailing list, and I would love to learn more about that. And then 2, like, how does it work? For instance, the exhibit you had for like the some sort of conference, and then they're like, "Oh, we want them displayed in this sort of way." Like, how involved are you in that? Or do they just give you a brief, like, "We're going to have these displayed in this way. You pick out the images that you want," or is that something that Julie helps you with? Like, how does that work?
Great questions. Absolutely. So the first part, sorry, remind me of the first part of the question.
A mailing list.
Yes, the mailing list. So on my website, on pretty much the bottom footer, just before you get to the footer, there's a place where you can just sign in with an email address. Or if someone directly uses the form to contact me, it will give them the option to opt into my mailing list. And that was pretty much it. So I just had that available. Or if someone did email me out of the blue, let's say I gave out a card at an opening that I was at, or portfolio review, following up with people and just saying, "Hey, can I sign you up to my email list?" Like, don't even give them the task. Like, be like, "I'll do it for you if you're okay with that." And then don't abuse that, right? So I don't send out more than like 4 emails a year. It's really quarterly, just so that people aren't unsubscribing all the time. And so, yeah, that just has allowed me to have several thousand people now that I'm just like, you know, it's like a little fan club that I can call on and that helps support me. So the sooner you can build that, I think the better off you are. And then the second part, sorry, it's getting late for me.
How they organize your exhibitions.
Absolutely. The requests come in, and the dynamics of it are always different. So for the World Economic Forum, there's someone whose job within the organization is to put together these kind of activations at their conferences. And so I worked very closely with her, where she was like, you know, at this budget, can you spend a month of your life flying around Southeast Asia, and we'll cover the expenses. And then from there, they were like, you know, essentially they were like, "Here's our favorite list. What would you like from that?" And then you boil that down to how much space do we have? How big can we print? What's the budget on the framing? So a lot of that is just back and forth between us. And I mean, we also get requests regularly where someone comes in with a huge idea. They've got a big national corporation and they're like, we really want to run this campaign thing and we really want to hang prints in this lounge area of our conference. And then we're like, okay, well, here's what that would cost to do it. And then we just never hear from them again, right? Or they're like, but you'll get great exposure. And they want it to be for free. And it's like, exposure is not necessarily my thing that I need at the moment, you know? So you kind of have to balance all of that. But sometimes there are organizations that do have a small budget. And I do want to work with them because I like what they're up to, or that it's going to put it in front of a new audience. And so you kind of modulate between those things. But Julie also helps navigate a lot of that, yeah.
The install for the no-show with the chairs in France was your idea originally, and then they were completely open to messing with the sound and all of that.
Yeah, so there's a curator in France called Francois Cheval. You should look him up. He just does incredible work. He was the head of the Niepce Foundation, which is like the founding of photography at his museum. He said, we've got this photo festival, and he had actually already shown my work in China at the Lianzhou Photos Festival, and I showed him no show, and he's like, absolutely, we've got to bring this to France right away. He knew how timely it was because I was like actually trying to get that show up before the election, and he was like, here's the space, do what you want. And I spent a lot of time on that. I mapped out so he gave me the dimensions of the room, and then I actually built a scaled down model of the gallery space out of mat board to scale for each of the chairs, gave them all the descriptions of the type of chairs so they could find them in France somewhere at like an estate sale. I was very particular about each piece of it so that it all came together. And then when you spend that kind of time on it and you show them, hey, I did this model, I did a video walkthrough of the gallery and labeled each piece where like the order of the hanging of the exhibition. And so when you do it like that and you show them that you care that much, then they're gonna like go all in with it too. So all of a sudden they found more money to then make sure we could have the projections and additional chairs at the front, because there was also a facade on the gallery that faced outside of this media center so that people would see those chairs and want to come in. And so they kept expanding it because I was like, I'm going to put the work in too, and they reciprocated. Yeah. You're welcome.
All right, we just about have one last question coming to you, Star.
Hi, I'm one of the students in the program too. I'm just wondering if you'd be interested in taking a selfie of yourself with us in the background without our phones.
You guys want to do a remove selfie in here? I'll do it. I didn't bring my view camera, but I can do it. All right, sure. Julie, is your phone powered on? Can I use yours? I shut mine down for the talk, so. And it's like 8 years old, so I don't even know if it'll turn back on in time. Thank you. Yeah, should we get the house lights up? That's great when photographers want to make pictures. Marco, is that okay? You can fix your gain. And if anyone doesn't want to be in the photo, yes. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't want to be in, that's okay. You're welcome. There's no pressure on that. Yeah.
We'll be at the Chelsea Hotel in 10 minutes.
All right, so everybody want to get on their phones? We'll do this. Let's see if I can get everyone in on the angle here. All right, I'm going to be barely in here, but we can do it, I think. Am I missing anybody? All right, everybody look down. Hold on, let me check it. It looks like I'm giving a thumbs up. Hold on, one more. I can get my hand all the way in there. All right, that'll have to do. Thank you all so much. Thank you.